Okay, who am I? It's an interesting question. I'm Gordon Headley, and I basically worked in industry for about 30 years, so the perspectives I may bring to Poland may be slightly different to your my very learned colleagues. So I'm a humble manager from an oil background, a schizophrenic career in that I had 17 years as an engineer in the oil industry, working up managing oil fields overseas, developing oil fields, that type of thing, and then got into a big change management program after the oil price dropped, and I ended up with a career in HR, which wasn't designed, but it was part of my destiny, as it were. And it was interesting seeing how my engineering friends did not trust the fact that I'd gone into HR, and they said to me, "What happened? What did you do? Did you screw up?" So it was so interesting, their perception of how can you trust someone in HR, and all of a sudden my trust, because I was an engineer before, people trust engineers. Go into HR, it's classed as the dark side. So therefore, it was quite interesting, that experience. So I've now been in HR for 17 years, in 3 international companies, and still working with a company with operations in about 35 countries, with 87,000 people in the business. So trust is very important to me. For me, it's in many ways the foundation of everything. I felt my own personal integrity was based on trust. And the world we live in now has changed so much from previously. With the technology changes, all of a sudden people don't trust authority. It's now basically the mass view that seems to be more important than the word of someone at the top. So for me, the whole thing has changed. So you can't now assume that just because an order comes from the board that people will believe it. You've almost got to propose an idea, co-develop ideas with your people, rather than just dump the ideas from the top and just assume that they'll be accepted. So this whole aspect of trust is essential to get working, otherwise the organization will not function. I think the interesting thing is, again, very often when organizations are very much in a hurry. We always want, in the oil industry, we used to drill for oil, we discovered oil, and then we had to produce oil from that country. And very often that country had never had an oil industry before. So therefore, all of a sudden we're saying, trust us, we will develop your oil and we will give you the money from it. If you look at working in Africa, that has not been the experience of the African people, because normally oil companies have gone in and it's not always been very happy. In fact, they often call it the curse of resources. So it's very difficult to establish that trust. And how can you then determine that, oh, don't worry, we're not going to be like the other big companies that have come in and ruined your country. You've got to then establish that trust through relationships, through building that trust in baby steps. So you can't be too arrogant and assume that everyone's just going to trust you because you've got an oil business. You can assume trust, but you'll fail.
Okay.
I think you've got to build trust very slowly with building relationships and delivery on promises. So for example, if you say that you'll do something, you better do it. Otherwise, you will not build the trust, because people will just say, well, this guy has, hollow promises that this company from England has come in and drilled this well, and there is they haven't delivered the well, they haven't drilled on time, they haven't employed all the people they said they would employ. So you have to be very careful with how you're presenting your business case and how you present that. And the essence of what you present and what you deliver will very often, on a fundamental level, determine trust. The whole thing's got to be basically congruent within the organization. Because if you have a different message inside the organization what can happen, and I saw it happen, is your people will go out on site, they'll meet local communities, and they'll say something different. So that message of trust and promise has to be consistent all the way through the organisation. Otherwise, you'll come, again, the message will be, how can we trust them? Because their leaders say one thing and the people in my village say another. So it's incredibly important to have this congruence and consistent messaging throughout the whole group. Within teams, again, it's down to communication and demonstrating you are worthy of trust. So for example, it's a bit like saying something you'll deliver or support the people on, and then you actually deliver that and you build that relationship. So it's again, baby steps relationship, slow burning with regards, you actually walk the talk and you do what you say you will do. So it's complete consistency, because if you say one thing, even one thing outside to external stakeholders and then to your team, another message, all of a sudden there's a disconnect, an incongruence there that your team will see. Because of media now, everyone sees everything, and therefore that's why the messaging has to be so important and so consistent, but very well presented. I think it's possible, but one of the things I've found in organisations, you build trust slowly. You can remove trust immediately, and we've seen a number of corporate failures throughout the world where there's been a real breakdown in trust, and that trust disappears immediately, and it takes years to build. And very often, once that trust is lost, you have to build a foundation again and start again. Very often there's been cases in industry, Union Carbide for example in India, there's been Shell in Nigeria, there's been a number of companies that have lost trust, and once you lose it, it is very hard to come back. BP in the Gulf of Mexico disaster, a huge case in point. Very few companies would have survived that. BP only survived it because they had assets to sell to basically bolster their business and still make the payouts. So they still don't have trust in the US re-established. So it's a case of that's going to take years. It's almost necessary for them to rebrand their company in the US, maybe even change its name so that that memory is gone. My plan, I'm going to share with people a bit of experience. I'm going to do some discussion from the Headley Barometer survey, which is a trust survey in the world, that pick out the specific things that are appropriate to companies. And then I'm going to provide some information and some tips on how to build trust in a team and some steps to actually build trust generally.